Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Dan, for having me, first of all, and thank you all for coming. I'm really excited about talking about this. This is really my passion, the power of workshops to transform teams. And I've got some slides to share with you, but I just thought to kind of give you some context, it's worth doing a little bit of an introduction, a very short kind of background as to how and where, how I got to where I am today, talking about this idea. So as Dan says, my company is Bracket. Always focused on helping teams work better together, and I'm super passionate about collaboration. When I started Bracket, it didn't look like what it looks like today. In fact, I was bringing teams together. So I didn't actually really set out to be a workshop facilitator. I kind of stumbled across workshops in the work that I was doing. So I'll explain what I mean when I said I was putting teams together. I had a network of freelancers, creative freelancers, and I'd work with clients to put together bespoke teams that would create and deliver creative and innovation projects for those clients. So everything was very bespoke teams and bespoke projects and bespoke briefs. And the reason I did that was because, as I said, I was very passionate about the power of collaboration. What happens when you bring brilliant individuals together with different skill sets into a project and sort of create the environment for them to work well together. Now, because those freelancers that I was bringing into teams hadn't worked together before, I would set up a meeting just as we were kicking off a project. And because I wasn't a creative producer myself, I was the person that was facilitating that was kind of leading the discussion. Although I didn't know at the time that I was actually facilitating, it just made sense to do that. So I'd done sort of lots of research in my MA into, you know, what makes a creative environment, and realised it was very much about kind of creating a space and sitting back and kind of guiding the discussion, helping the team to make progress. And so that's what I did. And as I say, I didn't even know that I was facilitating at the time. I was just doing what made sense to enable collaboration within that space. And people started picking up on that and saying, actually, that thing that you're doing, not really interested in kind of you bringing a team together for us, but that thing that you're doing, which is kind of facilitating, orchestrating this workshop, we want you to do that for our team. And that's when I started to kind of facilitate workshops for other people. And so one thing led to another. I got asked to write a book, and I, you know, continued to facilitate workshops, continued to love it, and realised that I was learning a lot, not just in the facilitation of the workshops, but learning a lot more about collaborative teams and collaboration. I was seeing that actually facilitating a workshop was very much like leading a team through uncertainty and encouraging a team to be creative, all in kind of a focused space of time. And also I was seeing what was happening when I was working with clients, when I had the privilege to work with clients beyond a one-off workshop and perhaps doing kind of a series of workshops, or they were calling me back in to do a workshop every now and again. I was seeing how that was starting to make shifts, not only in the session, in the ideas that they developed, but how they worked as a team. And that's what kind of got me thinking. It's like, what if we don't have to like reserve the good stuff that comes out of a workshop to just that event itself? What if we could kind of extract those principles and make it part of our culture? I mean, one of the things I was seeing, and you probably see this when you facilitate workshops as well, is that particularly when I was doing things like strategy away days, you know that when people were in the office, they were kind of quite formal, maybe even wearing ties and a suit. Those were the kinds of companies that I was working with. When they come to the away day, they were wearing like t-shirts and trainers. And it's like, well, you know, when the away day's finished and you go back to your job, are you going to put the suit and the tie on again? Like, why is this space different? And it just dawned on me that actually we want to encourage more of what we see in workshops outside of workshops as well. So how can we do that? And that's when I landed on this idea of workshop culture. So I'm going to share my my slides now. Oh, I've done that wrong, sorry. Let me share my screen first, that'll probably be useful. There we go. Yes, this is where I landed on this idea of workshop culture. And what I mean by workshop culture is just that. It's like, how might we extend the good stuff that comes out of workshops beyond the end of a workshop? You know that feeling, we all kind of get to the end of a session and it's great, there's been lots of ideas, everyone feels really motivated, everyone's really fired up. And then, you know, as I say, people go back to their desks the next day, they put their suit and their tie on and it's kind of back to normal. And it's like, that feels like such a massive, massive shame to me. And as I said, I started to see, when I was running workshops more regularly with a client, how it was starting to actually make shifts in their culture, in the way that they work together, in not just in the workshops, but in between the workshops as well. The results of a great workshop, you get great collaboration. We know this, you know, creativity, people were able to speak up, we have the equal contributions. It produces great content, you know, ideas, better ideas than you could produce on your own. And there's clarity around that content as well. And you kind of get that forward momentum. People were talking about that energy that you get. So those are like the very kind of tangible results you get from a workshop. We also had some thoughts about what people feel when you're in a workshop as well. You feel engaged, you feel connected to the people that you're working with. We've got all of those elements of, you know, Dan Pink's, sort of the things that motivate knowledge workers, the autonomy, the idea that you can get to the end goal in the way that works for you. You're kind of really challenged, you're able to sort of work on your mastery, and you know the purpose, you know where you're trying to get to. So you feel part of that bigger picture, and you're making progress. So you've got the results, you've got the experience of the participants. But as I said, what I was finding were these unintended consequences. So this term actually came from somebody that had told me that these are the unintended consequences of workshops in a positive way. When people work in a more workshop-like manner, or they are exposed to workshops, there's better communication between them. They start to open up more, they can build more trust. And they even start thinking about new ways of working together, new ways of thinking together. So there's all these kind of things that can happen if you really do think about how can we take these the impact of a workshop beyond that. And if you've read the Sprint book, you know, the Sprint book is by Jake Knapp, really great process that's outlined there. If you go to the end of the book in sort of his conclusion, in his wrap up, you'll see this quote, and this is what really stood out for me when I read the book. After your first sprint, you might notice a shift in the way that your team works. You'll build confidence in one another's expertise and in your collective ability to make progress towards ambitious goals. So a workshop is not just great for the outcomes that you achieve, it's great for the way that a team starts to think differently about how they can work. I don't know if you've ever had the privilege of facilitating a workshop for the first time with a team, and that I mean a team that's never been in that kind of collaborative space. I mean, the transformation is huge because they always like, you know, we didn't know that we could work like this. We didn't know that we could achieve so much in a short space of time. In this workshop, we've achieved more than we have in weeks of discussions. You know, you get those kinds of comments. And it really does kind of shift people's thinking in the way of what's possible in how they work together. If you start to do that more regularly, then again, it's not just reserved to that specific time and event. So if you think about introducing a workshop culture, it's not all done by kind of saying, right, okay, we're going to move from being non-collaborative into, you know, all of a sudden being completely collaborative and working in a workshop-like fashion. And I should also say as well about workshop culture, the reason I coined this term workshop culture is that we know that we have a need for teams to be more collaborative. But when we say the word collaboration, it's such a broad term. People don't often know what that means when they think about actions and behaviours on a daily basis. But when you talk about a workshop culture, you know, we all know, if we've been part of a great workshop, we all know what that feels like. You kind of wrote all of your comments in the chat box earlier. You know what a great workshop feels like. So if you can relate that, you can say, right, okay, these things, those things that we got out of workshops, that's what we want to achieve in our culture. Then it kind of becomes a little bit more tangible. It gives people something to work towards. People understand what it is that collaboration actually means to them. And as I say, all of these kinds of things, you know, we get them from a workshop, but why should they be reserved to a one-off event? Those are the kinds of things that we want in our culture anyway. So when we're thinking about introducing the workshop culture, what I've learned, and you know, I stumbled across this is just through trial and error and experience, and sort of a lived experience of running workshops with teams. The first one is that you've got to run a really great workshop. As I said, if you're the first person to facilitate a workshop for a team, you've got a real opportunity to show them a new way of working. So it's your duty as a facilitator to make that workshop brilliant. You know, think about not just what's going to happen in the workshop itself, but how that workshop is going to make impact after, how you're going to sort of craft the follow-up so that people can see the efforts of the day actually translated into their work. And then when you've run a great workshop and people are kind of exposed to this new way of working, then you've got the buy-in to run more regular workshops, which is what I started to do with some of my clients. You know, the first time I ran a facilitated session, they were like, this is great, can you come in and do, you know, our next partner meeting for us as well? So they're slowly starting to get the idea that this can be quite an effective way of working. And then that's when you start to see the impact, you know, opening up in between the workshops, the communication between the team, even them starting to take some of those kind of workshop activities into their own meetings, like using post-it notes and kind of individual thinking and kind of breakout groups. They start to, those kind of things start to infiltrate into the team, which then encourages better collaboration, more transparency, more communication, more creativity. And then the final stage is when you've reached the kind of workshop culture, when there's not really a differentiation between workshops and the way that the team is working. Now, this isn't to say that those one-off kind of special events, the away days, aren't needed. You know, I still believe strongly that there's a need for those kind of very focused offsites where people might get together and kind of think about a strategy or a future, or they need to brainstorm some creative ideas and they just need to get out of their environment and they need a focused day for it. But at the same time, we do also want some elements of that collaboration, that creativity in our culture anyway. And that's what I mean by a workshop culture, that we're kind of running our meetings in a more collaborative way. We are, you know, whiteboarding more naturally, and we are sort of asking questions of each other more naturally as well, and being more curious and opening up. There's more transparency, there's more trust, all those good things that you achieve in a workshop. So I've also been playing around with some principles, because this idea of workshop culture I'm actually writing a book on it. And I started to kind of think about, how do I package this up so that it becomes something that people can actually implement, and as I said, it becomes a bit more tangible. So these are some of the principles that I've been playing around with. The first principle is that, you know, the foundation of it is that a workshop can be more than a one-off event. Let's not see our workshops as kind of this one separate special thing where everything needs to happen. I mean, if you facilitate workshops and you know that it's unlikely that it's possible to change a culture in one workshop anyway, actually it's kind of the start of a process or the start of a discussion. And not only that, as I say, the principles within a workshop can be useful and valuable within our culture generally. So let's stop thinking about workshops as these kind of one-off special events. The next principle is something that a facilitator has to do constantly, which is balancing creativity and productivity within a session. There's value in generating ideas and giving those ideas time to breathe, making space for them, and playing around and experimenting and trying out new things. We need that, but also we need to make sure that we make progress and we make those ideas actionable. We turn those ideas into action, that creativity into productivity. So we need to do that in a workshop, but we also need to do that in a workshop culture as well. We need to know when it's time to be creative and when it's time to let ideas live and breathe, and also when we need to actually turn those ideas into something so that we can move forward. Tiny tweaks, not sweeping changes. As I said, this is not something that you go from 0 to 100 in a day. Actually, the way to implement a workshop culture is to make these little tiny nudges. You know, run a workshop, see what the response is. Take a workshop activity and put it into your meeting and see what the response is. Start asking more questions of your team and see what the response is. Start doing kind of ad hoc brainstorming sessions, see what the response is. It's not kind of going from, you know, never having collaborated, never running a workshop, to all of a sudden running workshops every single day. And that would be exhausting anyway. As someone said, you know, you'd be stuffed every single day. If you run workshops, you can't do that. So knowing when the right time is to do it, but introducing it in small steps, because change is and can be difficult for teams and humans generally. And then the final thing is a workshop culture is designed, you know, in the same way that you would design a workshop beforehand. You kind of create what it is that you want to achieve, and you design the structure and the narrative and the activities based on that. You're doing the same thing with the workshop culture. It's intentional. You know why you're doing what you're doing, and you're doing this collaboratively with your team as well. You're designing it collaboratively with your team. And then underpinning all of this, this is what the sort of the key aspect of this is this idea of facilitation, and taking facilitation beyond a workshop setting into our culture generally. And now, looking at facilitation as a leadership skill, I'm not the first person to say this. There's loads of research out there that shows that leadership and management needs to move to a much more facilitative style. And this was a report that was that came out from a branding agency, global branding agency called Wolf Olins, called Impossible and Now. And they interviewed CEOs and employees to understand what they wanted from leaders, what leaders needed to look like in order to lead for the future. And this is one of the things that they said, you know, leaders are learning to be less the visionary, less the sage, less the objective setter, and more the shaper, the connector, the questioner. Shaper, shaping, connecting, questioning. Sounds a lot like facilitation. And then there's this book, Teresa Amabile. Teresa Amabile is a massive influence for me. I read a lot of her research studies when I was doing my MA, which really helped to shape my approach to managing or facilitating creativity, in a sense. The idea that, you know, creative people need autonomy, they need freedom, they need space, they need to be able to do the work in the way that suits them. But more recently, she wrote this book, The Progress Principle, which was all about what motivates and engages knowledge workers, people like us, in their daily work. And through analysing lots of diary entries that she asked these knowledge workers to write, they found that overwhelmingly, the one thing that made a difference to whether somebody felt engaged and joyful about their work was that they were able to make progress. Didn't need to be a lot of progress, just needed to be a step forward. And then it changed and it shifted the way that we see the role of managers. You know, a manager isn't there to necessarily make decisions and tell people what to do. It's more, a manager is there to clear the barriers to people making progress. As long as people can, you know, move forward in their work, then they're more likely to be happy and engaged. And therefore, that's what one of the managers' or leaders' role is to do. And then the final bit of research, quote, is from Linda Hill, who wrote this book, Collective Genius, which I definitely recommend reading if you're thinking about how to manage innovation more successfully. And she talks a lot about sort of the leadership style. Here she says, you know, instead of trying to come up with a vision and make innovation happen themselves, a leader of innovation creates a place, a context, an environment where people are willing and able to do that hard work that innovative problem solving requires. Again, you know, very similar to this idea of facilitation. I didn't sort of highlight that when I was talking about the progress principle, but, you know, the role of the managers, helping people to make progress, clearing barriers. I mean, that's exactly the definition of facilitation: facilitate, to make easier. So this idea of facilitation is, you know, it's broader than workshops. As facilitators, we've got so much more value that we can offer in being change makers within an organisation if we know how to take those skills that we use in leading groups of people and participants through uncertainty in a workshop, and we take that outside. And of course, you know, in times like these, the skill facilitation is hugely valuable because there's so much uncertainty, there's so much potential for creativity and innovation as well, and we need people that are able to facilitate that. So yeah, my kind of theory is that if you are able to design and facilitate great workshops, then you are in a position to be able to introduce a workshop culture that is being able to encourage and support a team to becoming more collaborative, increasing their performance, becoming more creative and productive together.